So Prime Minister Narendra Modi has landed in Moscow to begin his two-day visit to Russia. He's expected to meet his counterpart from Russia, President Vladimir Putin. They're going to be discussing a whole range of issues that form in the India-Russia strategic partnership. Now, to discuss this visit, what is going to be on the agenda between the two leaders, we have one of India's top diplomats, Ambassador Venkatesh Varma, who was India's ambassador in Moscow between 2019 and 2021. Ambassador Varma, thank you for joining us. Could you just begin by telling us what are the top issues that Prime Minister Modi is expected to discuss with President Putin? There has been a lot of discussion about future frontiers in the relationship, a free trade agreement, a more balanced trade relationship, among other things.
Yeah, thank you, Shashank, for this opportunity to speak on Prime Minister's visit to Russia. Of course, it is a very important visit. This is Prime Minister's first bilateral visit abroad after the 2024 elections. President Putin has also been re-elected as president after the elections in May. The meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin will be of not just bilateral significance, but global significance. I think it's important to recall that in the world stage today, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin are amongst the most senior world leaders. Both of them have been in public life for almost 25 years. So between them, the amount of experience that they have is quite remarkable. This will come in use because it is taking place, this summit is taking place against a very complex international situation, which is the background to our bilateral relations. Our bilateral relations are, of course, solid, stable, but obviously they need to readjust to the new international realities. But the ability of India and Russia to readjust to this turbulent international situation, I think, is much better than other bilateral relationships. So that, I think, is the background. On economic relations, of course, we've seen a tremendous boost in bilateral trade. Traditionally, our bilateral trade used to be around $10 to $12 billion per year. There were practical, institutional, and economic limitations to the relationship. But I think since the commencement of the Ukraine conflict, the confluence of geopolitical interests and the market opportunities that arose in the energy sector, I think India and Russia were able to find a common ground, and our bilateral trade is well above $65 billion, $66 billion. A substantial portion of which is, of course, India's purchases of discounted Russian energy resources in this period. Bilateral trade on other commodities is around $4 to $5 billion. Of course, there's great potential to take it forward. There's been a change in the economic landscape in Russia. I think it is a great opportunity for Indian business to enter the Russian market. There are, of course, difficulties, banking difficulties, connectivity issues. These will be resolved as we move along. But this is the new normal. This is the new normal in a very troubled world, that we have to find new solutions to what are pressing current problems. And I'm sure Prime Minister Modi and President Putin will set the tone for the bilateral relationship to grow in the years to come, taking into account the difficulties that we currently face, but also underlining the determination of both sides to see how we can solve these difficulties. And I think both sides are intending to do so. The personal rapport between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin is well known. I think it's a great asset to our relationship. India-Russia relations have always been summit-driven. This summit also will be no exception. So it will set the tone for some very important discussions going forward.
Right, I understand. And could I also ask you, what is the state of the India-Russia defense relationship? This is obviously something that's extremely important and has been historically very important to the bilateral relationship. So how do you see the state of the relationship? And how do you also see Russia's declining share in India's arms import basket? Because this is something that a lot of experts have been talking about.
With respect to defense relations, I think Sometimes we hear in the strategic community the description of a legacy relationship. I think that is not the appropriate way to term it. India has a very strong bilateral defense relationship with Russia, built over many decades for historic reasons, and for reasons of congruence of geopolitical interests. The congruence of geopolitical interests still continues. That doesn't mean that either India or Russia recognizes an exclusivity in our relationship. India has diversified in its sourcing of foreign partners. Russia still remains a very significant partner, and I expect that to continue for the next 2-3 decades. And I think it's in our interest to see that this relationship is well serviced, because finally the test of a good relationship in the defense sphere is whether it adds to or detracts our combat capabilities in the conflict situation that we envisage. So it is in our interest, that is India's interest, to take care of the Russia relationship. Taking into account that Russia should also participate more actively in the Make in India program in India. There are already some considerable success stories. The AK-203 production deal. AK-203 is the Kalashnikov rifle, one of the best assault rifles in the world. There are already 35,000 pieces have already been delivered to the Indian Army. It's locally manufactured in UP with, when the project is completed, 100% technology transfer. So that is a good example, not just for Russia to emulate, but also to our other foreign partners to see how they can take advantage of the Indian ecosystem in the defense sector, where a strong private sector partnership is also now a very major driver. And that is true not just in the defense sector. I think in the energy sector, in the retail sector, in the manufacturing sector, we would like Indian business to go into Russia. We would like private Russian business to come into India. India is one of the largest, fastest growing economies in the world. So it offers a great opportunity for Russia to explore and become partners in the Indian market. So I think, though it is unfortunate that we tend to stress the relationship as something in the past, I think it is not just in the past, because some of the weapon systems that we are having already in our inventory which are of Russian origin will continue to be with us until 2050, 2060, 2070. I mean, 40, 50 years from now. So it is in our own interest to take this forward. And I think Russian defense industry has rebounded in the last 2 years. Many of their equipment are battle tested in the Ukraine conflict. That said, of course, we will choose and pick and choose what suits our interests and our requirements as far as our armed forces are concerned.
Right. So that's defense on one side. If I may also ask you about China, will India raise any concerns about Russia's relationship with China during the course of this bilateral summit?
With respect to China, of course, there has been a big rebound in the Russia-China relationship. Going forward, it is an extraordinarily powerful geopolitical reality that all countries, including India, have to take into account. But I think it is easy to exaggerate the depth and the strategic convergence between Russia and China. This is tactical, driven largely by the fact that relations of Russia with the West have almost broken down, largely on account of the Ukraine conflict. Whether the Ukraine conflict can provide a leeway, an early pathway to peace, we'll wait and see. We'll see how the battlefield situation progresses. But it has had a huge geopolitical impact and created a huge geopolitical global disequilibrium where Russia is caught up in the back foot as part of its European security. The United States is overextended. It has expanded NATO, and there is no sight of the Ukraine conflict coming to an end. The Middle East situation is largely unstable now. And other parts of the world are also showing signs of instability. And it is not possible for any major part, be it the United States or China or Russia, to be engaged across the world. And conflict among the big powers is, I think, one of the reasons for the new phase of instability that we witness. So this has given China a geopolitical advantage, and I hope that both Russia and the United States recognize the perils of prolonged confrontation between them. And I'm sure this will form the backdrop for discussions between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin when they meet later this evening and tomorrow as well during the summit.
And finally, if I could ask you about this recent controversy that has come up about Indians being missiled into fighting for Russia in the Ukraine war. Is this controversy going to be discussed? Is this likely to cause any difficulties in bilateral ties?
With respect to Indian nationals, I think our government has always been upfront in seeking to protect their interests abroad, especially in conflict situations. You would recall that Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Putin and President Zelensky when Indian students were to be evacuated from the conflict zone in Sumy in northeast Ukraine in 2022. And it's very fortunate that almost all students were evacuated successfully. And it's no mean feat to do that in a conflict situation. So I think there's already a very good background to the fact that we will look after the interests of our Indian nationals. Now, why these Indian nationals have allowed themselves to be recruited into the armed forces of the Russian Federation, as is reported in the press, is something that needs to be inquired into. But now that they have been landed up in a rather difficult situation, I'm sure the Indian government and our Indian leadership will leave no stone unturned to ensure their safe return. And I think in President Putin and the Russian government will find a very supportive and a sympathetic ear. So I'm pretty confident that this relationship, this issue will be settled, pretty soon to the satisfaction of both sides. That said, I think it is important to recall that India-Russia relationship has a long history, but I think it has a future, and the future has to be built by the new generation of students, of experts, of people-to-people contacts, of business leaders, both private and from the public sector, and particularly our private business sector can do a lot to add new dynamism and new momentum to India-Russia relations. So I'm pretty confident of the outcome, that the outcome of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia will be, and that it will be a very successful visit.
Ambassador Varma, thank you so much for joining us and for explaining what this visit is going to be about, what the two leaders are expected to talk about, and what the future frontiers are likely to be for the India-Russia relationship. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global.